I've got some tips and tricks to help you set some crafting goals this year, as well as some things to consider to help you make the most effective goals possible. Hi, my name is Emily Crow from Crochet Creations and welcome to my YouTube channel. It has been a while since I have sat in front of the camera. You can see we are now in our new house and the crafting room area is kind of a work in progress, if I can say that. So excuse the mess as things are still kind of getting settled down, but with the new year fast approaching, I know some people don't like making New Year's resolutions and goals. For me, the end of the year is a really good benchmark for me to look back on the previous year and reflect, as well as look forward to the next year and what I want to accomplish and what I want that year to look like. And now I can't plan everything, but for me, I enjoy planning and I enjoy having that vision for what things will look like. And I think that that can be carried not only into our personal lives, but even into our crafting lives, into our hobbies. So with the new year coming right up, I really wanted to talk about this as I'm using these tips and tricks to help me make my plans for 2023. And I thought that it could help you as well. And if you don't like to set goals for the new year, that's totally okay. You can set goals anytime. You know, you have complete control. When you are ready to set some goals and to see some changes in the way that you craft, either just for enjoyment and to like expand what you do, or if you want to set some goals to improve some skills or to learn some things, you can do that anytime. This isn't just a New Year's thing. And I think having the right perspective that it's not just a New Year's thing will help you carry those goals beyond just January 17th or whenever. I think that's the date that most people have quit their resolutions by. If they set some, then they quit by, I think, January 17th. It's a large percentage of people.
Is that true? Where did I get that date from?
And I know I'm guilty of that. I bet a lot of you are too. So let's get right into how to set some really good fiber related and crafting goals so that we can get the most out of the planning and preparation that we want to do. Okay, so very first thing I already mentioned, you need to reflect on the past year's goals. You need to reflect on what goals you set and how you created those goals in the first place, and you need to see what ended up happening throughout the year. For example, I set a make 9 goal of 9 things I wanted to make throughout the year, and I did not accomplish that goal all the way. In some ways I did, and in some ways I didn't quite reach the goal. And so looking back at that goal I made and understanding the choices I made for that goal, both in setting it as well as implementing it, can really help set the frame of mind I need to create more effective goals in the future. If I was really successful and did an awesome job at meeting my goal from the previous year, then that tells me a lot about how well I formulated my goal previously and can help me to make a repeat performance the very next year. So I think first and foremost, you need to reflect on last year's goals and what you did, or maybe what you gave up on, what deadlines you didn't meet, in what ways you maybe fell short of your goal, and what ways that you reached your goal, and maybe even what ways your goal was not a stretch enough. Maybe you set a goal to read 12 books in 2022, and you know what? You ended up reading like 50. So even though you met your goal, it didn't match the outcome very well. The goal didn't necessarily help you reach the number of books you read, and that's okay, but it's good to look back and figure out what happened. Why did it happen? And kind of just analyze that. Something else to help you figure out what yarny goals to make is to look back on any leftover projects you have, either things that you started that's a work in progress, or things that you intended to create and you did not for the previous year. And I think this can educate us and teach us kind of what things we were drawn to. It is kind of more of a reflection of the previous year, but in looking at those things, what are some works in progress you want to take with you into the next year and to work on and hopefully finish? What are some works in progress you don't, that you want to frog and get rid of or donate or whatever you want to do? you need to figure out what you want to do about that. And then for projects you didn't even start that you intended to, why didn't you start them? Is there a timing issue? Did you not have the supplies you needed? Did you just not want to do it anymore? If that's something you still want to do, then definitely put it on your list of goals that you want to accomplish the next year. But if it's not something you want to do, cross it off the list. It's something that you learned about yourself and you can move on, and that is totally okay. So you can use any leftover projects that you've started or not to add to your list of maker goals. Similarly, if you have any yarn that you've already purchased or patterns, books, magazines that you've already purchased, if you have maker supplies you've already acquired that you want to use, those are great fundamentals to have for your goals. There's already sunk cost for those things you have purchased. That kind of has a negative connotation, but the fact that you've already spent the money, and so why not make use of those things that you have? So you can set some goals to make projects using the yarn that you have, whether it's a stash general goal to use up some yarn stash, or whether you have specific projects that you want to make. You have a sweaters quantity that you want to make. You have certain sock yarns that you really want to use up. Then you can make goals for those yarns, and you can make goals for those patterns. I have a lot of pattern books, so I know. And whenever my favorite designer comes out with a new pattern or has a pattern sale, I almost always browse their shop to see if there's anything I want to snag. And so there's quite a few patterns in my pattern library that I have not gotten to yet, or even patterns I have made that I really want to make again. And so that is a really cost-effective way to make some goals and to create some things that are bringing you a lot of joy. And so that's something to think of when you are trying to set up a list of your maker goals. Another topic that I think a lot of people think about when they are setting goals, but I think it's still important to mention, is you should consider any new skills that you want to learn, anything new. I think a goal for learning is a great goal for the new year, or for maybe a change in season or a change in your life circumstances. Learning is always a good goal. And there are all sorts of skills you can learn. You can learn a new technique, like learning how to brioche knit, or learning how to crochet a new craft. You can go all the way over to like spinning or weaving and do something that's a totally different fiber art, or something not fiber art related, another craft. You can do that too. You may want to learn some new techniques, like how to use a Kitchener stitch, or perhaps different tools, how to use DPNs, and you might set some goals in order to expand your skill level within the crafts that you know, and that can be a really great goal. You may also want to try something new for the new year. This can be a new type of project like socks. I always talk about socks. If you've not knit a sock yet, you should. It is not as hard as you think it is. I promise you. If you want to create something new, you can try sock knitting, or you can make a sweater if it's your very first time. Garments can seem intimidating, but there's lots of beginner-friendly patterns out there. So you can definitely set a goal to make your first garment ever and accomplish that this year. Or if you want to be a test knitter or test crocheter and you haven't done that before, or you want to delve into the world of pattern design, those are all new things that you can try and experiment with that make great goals. You can also have a goal to just try and experiment with different types of needles. Maybe you are a sock knitter and you only use Xiaogu needles for socks, but you want to branch out to some Addi needles, or you want to use some DPNs. Maybe you want to see if you like wooden needles when you've really only used metal needles. You can just try. You don't have to become an expert at it, but it can be a goal to just try something new and see how you like it. You can try a new fiber content, like an alpaca-based yarn, or maybe a hand-spun yarn. You can try making a project with a different type of fiber than you're used to, and that can be a really fulfilling goal to just explore and try something new, and you might find your new favorite thing. Okay, now we're getting into more of like a time-sensitive related goals that are really good to keep in mind if you want to set some goals for the year. Are there any make-alongs that you want to participate in? A make-along is an event where you and other people make the same or similar items at the same time, potentially using the same yarns, in order for you all to have like that community and that companionship related to that making experience. So for example, Andrea Mowry does quite a few make-alongs throughout the year. And I think there's one coming up, the March to May knit along, that is make a sweater or a shawl within that time frame. And so if you know you want to participate in a make along like that, then definitely keep track of that as a goal, because you don't want to get to like 2 days before the make along starts and remember, oh yeah, I wanted to do that and now I don't have the yarn or have too many other things on my plate, I just can't fit that in. If that's something important to you, now is the time to keep track of that and write it down. I have loved doing Sarah Shira's Mystery Gnome knit-alongs, and so now I have a better idea after doing them a few times of when those knit-alongs come out. And so one of my goals is going to be making time to participate in that make-along, because I really, really enjoy it. And so if there's a make-along you really want to do, keep track of that. Make that a goal, so that you can make time for it later on in the year when it happens. We are now into winter time, and I think it's important to think of the seasonal things that we may want to either make or use and making those into our goals. Now in the winter time, it is cold, 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 and I don't have any cardigans, and I honestly don't have a lot of sweaters. Something I want to do is make more of those colder weather items so that I can stay nice and cozy for the winter months. You might also find that you want to make some seasonal decor. Like if you love Christmas, then you may want to knit or crochet or weave or whatever, make something Christmassy so that you can appreciate that and enjoy that during the Christmas season. So I think it's important to think about the things we want to make seasonally and plan ahead for that, instead of something that I do often is it gets to be October and I'm starting to feel cold and I realize that I don't have anything to wear to keep me warm. And by the time I finish a sweater, it's already December or January and I was cold for 3 months. So something you can do if you know you want something in particular for a given season, or you really want to make a shawl in the spring, then make a goal of it. Make time for that piece so that you can work on it when you want to in the year and you can use it when you want to in the year. Rather than feeling like your timing was off, I made a dress for my daughter, and it's a beautiful dress. It's called the Moon Glade dress by Roro and Cades, and it was in these beautiful like peachy, pink, yellowy colors. It was so, so cute. I think I finished it in September, which is not a bad time. You can wear a summery colored dress anytime, but I feel like I would have enjoyed the process of making it a lot more, and I would have enjoyed seeing my daughter wear it a lot more if I had finished it in May and had all summer for her to enjoy this beautiful summery dress. And she can still wear it now in the wintertime, but I'm just not drawn to putting that on her right now, and that's okay. But knowing that, I think keeping the seasons and holidays and things in mind for our making can help us get the most use out of them now and the most joy out of them, rather than feeling like our timing was off. Something specifically that I mentioned that I want to dive into further is expanding your wardrobe. I mentioned that I don't have a lot of sweaters, and especially cardigans. This is a store-bought cardigan because I had no cardigans to speak of to wear that fit me. And so if you know that there's a gap in your regular wardrobe that can be filled by something knitwear or crochet wear, then definitely dive into that. Maybe you realize you don't have a lot of summer tops and you want something more lightweight. The great part about knitting or crocheting is that you can make items fit you and what you need. You can have it fit your specifications. You can make it in the color you want, in the fiber you want. You can alter the fit and do any modifications you need. The sky's the limit with the fiber arts, and same is true for like sewing, right? For other crafts, but you have so much control and you don't have to just walk into a store and pay $30 for a blouse that is almost right, but like not quite the right shade of blue, or like doesn't fit your body the way you would ideally want, but it's good enough. Like you don't have to do that when you're knitting or crocheting. You can make something be exactly what you want it to be. And so if there is a gap in your wardrobe, you can fill it with knitting or crochet if you want. And I think that that is a great goal to keep in mind. If you know that you need a specific thing in your wardrobe or specific things, then make a goal to create those things and to fill those gaps and to really flush out your wardrobe with the things that you need. Okay, lastly, for specific items that I think would make great things to put on your maker list is considering gift knits as well as other special occasions that you may want to create things for. Now, when it comes to gift knitting, know who is knitworthy in your life. Knitworthy is a phrase used to describe someone who is worth knitting for, that respects and honors your making ability, that understands how much work goes into something handmade and appreciates it. And those people are worth knitting for sure. And if you know you want to make something for someone, set some goals for it. Know what you want to make them, know by when you want to finish the item so that you can make sure to give it to them when you are hoping to. If you don't have a specific date in mind, that's okay too. But I think it's important that if you want to make gift knits, that you make a goal to do so, or else you may not fit them into your schedule of all the things you want to make. So instead of having that idea in the back of your mind that it would be nice to knit some socks for your whole family, you should just do it and make a plan and make a goal to make it happen. I know some people make beautiful items for occasions like weddings. If you have a wedding coming up that either you're the bride or groom for, or if you are like part of the wedding party, or even just want something to fit that formal occasion, that's the one I'm thinking of. But there are all sorts of special occasions. Maybe someone's like 80th birthday, or if you are going to New York City Times Square for like New Year's Eve, like there are all sorts of things from formal to informal that if you know you want to create something for that occasion, make it a goal so you can make it happen. I think it's so beautiful that people have knit their own wedding shawls. I think that's such a beautiful heirloom piece to make on such a special day. And I wish that I had thought of doing something like that for my wedding. I wasn't a knitter yet, but I could have crocheted something, and I think that's really beautiful. So if you have any special occasions coming up, any momentous things that you want to have something handmade for, then set a goal so that you can make it happen. Okay, so I've talked about some specifics on like picking projects and yarns and things that you may want to make, and it's all up to you on what you want to do. But I do want to leave you with some thoughts on things to consider when you are making these goals so that you can make the goals the most effective that you can and really make things happen that you want to make happen. Okay, first and foremost, I want to talk about SMART goals. And if you have not heard of SMART goals before, it's a guideline for setting effective goals. SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. And so those are 5 guidelines used to create goals that are effective and that can propel you towards actually completing them. If you say something vague like, I want to knit a sweater this year, that's awesome. That's a great place to start. But how are you going to make that happen? When are you going to make that happen? Do you have the supplies already for it or not? Like, what do you need to do about that? Because if you just say a vague, I want to make a sweater this year, chances are it won't happen, or it won't happen until you set some specific things about it and make it more refined. So as for specific, make sure your goal is really, really specific. I want to knit this pattern by this designer in this yarn, in this size this year. I have to keep track of size, because if I don't write down the size when I make a goal like that, I will probably forget it, and then I'll have to remeasure myself, and I'll have to look at my gauge again and the measurements and how much ease do I want. So if you've already figured out what size you want to make, write that down too, for sure. So be specific about exactly what you want that goal to be. If you want to try DPNs to make a sock and you've never used DPNs before, a way that you can make that goal specific is saying, I will knit 1 pair of socks for my toddler with my size 1 metal DPNs. I'm trying not to like go into the other steps, but say something specific. If you just say, I want to knit a pair of socks on DPNs, that's awesome, but like, how will you make that happen? I think is the biggest question. That's a goal that I set over the summer for summer sock camp that did not happen because I didn't have any plans. I didn't have a pattern. I didn't even have the yarn that I wanted to use. I didn't cast on, and so it just never happened. For measurable, measurable is something tangible that you can say, yes, I made the goal, or no, I did not. So if you say something like, I want to use up my yarn stash, that's awesome, but how do you measure that? Do you measure that by how many grams of yarn you use throughout the year? Do you measure that by how many skeins you brought into your stash versus how many you used? Is that referring to which skeins of yarn you used up? Do you have specific yarns that you really want to use versus other yarns that are okay sitting in your stash for longer? There's all sorts of questions to consider. Just saying, I want to use my yarn stash could be so many things. Do you want to have 0 skeins at the end of the year? You could, but you need to say that. You need to specify so that you can measure whether that goal has been met and to what extent it has been met, so that you can both look at your goal and make it happen throughout the year. That's like my phrase today, make it happen. And that you can look back and reflect on that goal and whether or not you succeeded, and know like how far away you were from reaching your goal, what barriers you had to reaching your goal, maybe what helped you reach that goal, so that at the end of the year you have a better understanding of that goal, and that can help you make goals for the next year. I know we're already talking about making goals for 2024. That's a lot. I'm sorry. The next letter for SMART goals is relevant. It needs to be applicable. So for the letter R, I've seen it both ways. It can be relevant or realistic for goals. I like realistic because relevant is a little hard to define. Relevant can be that goal will create the outcome you want. Because for example, if you want to use up your yarn stash, but you say that your goal is not buying any yarn, that goal is related to your budget and spending of yarn and maybe to the yarn that's coming into your life, but it's not necessarily talking about the yarn you use up. If you don't knit anything or crochet anything in the year, you still didn't use up your yarn stash, even if you were on budget, if that makes sense. So they're not quite relevant. They're not quite a match for each other. For realistic, I think it's really important to look at what your previous goals are and what you can actually accomplish. If last year you knit 2 pairs of socks, I think that's awesome. But if you only knit 2 pairs of socks, it might be hard to set a goal to knit 12 pairs of socks in the year. Maybe you can do it. I think that's up to you to decide what is realistic for your goal. But look at what you've made before or what you've wanted to make and evaluate. My Make 9 list has a lot of sweaters, and I did not make a lot of sweaters this year. And so that wasn't very realistic of me to expect myself to make a majority sweaters when a majority I knit socks this year. And so I think it's just knowing yourself and what is realistic to what you can create. Maybe you want to use up your yarn stash, but you have 300 skeins of yarn. It's probably not realistic to use up all 300 skeins of that yarn. Maybe if you are super prolific, I'm not sure, but just look at yourself and what you can do. If you use up a couple skeins a month, then that is realistic as a goal for you. Maybe it's realistic to push the boundary a little. Maybe you want to use up 5 skeins a month, but you typically use 2 or 3. That could maybe be realistic depending on the time that you take to knit or the types of yarns that you use. If you use super bulky yarns, those work up a lot quicker than lace weight and fingering weight yarns. So it's really up to you to consider what realistic looks like, but you're not doing yourself any favors by setting goals that are way, way far out there. There's the phrase reach for the moon. If you fail, you'll land among the stars, but that doesn't work for goal setting. Honestly, if you set goals that are unrealistic, then you're going to give up way too early and you're not going to be successful in any shape of the word. Maybe you'll try to get close, but if you're panic knitting gift knits in December right before Christmas because you need to finish 6 pairs of socks, speaking from personal experience, you're not going to enjoy it. You're not. And so don't push yourself and stress yourself out trying to reach unrealistic goals. So there's 2 sides going. You can either do that or you can just give up really early and then not get anywhere close to your goal. Instead, make a realistic goal so you can actually make it happen. And with realistic goals, you can help yourself grow a little bit, but just know how much of that growth is reasonable versus how much you're asking too much to do within the time frame you have. And that's the last point. T is for time-based. You need to have a deadline or some kind of time frame in which to complete that goal. So, for example, gift knitting. If you have a specific birthday or holiday that you want to have gifts ready for, or if you want to, for example, for summer sock camp, knit a pair of socks on double pointed needles, then have a goal to finish it by the end of July in that month. And so you have a basis from which to focus your efforts and know when you want to do things by. If you want to become a pattern designer and set a goal for creating a pattern, if you don't have a date that you want that pattern released for, your pattern might not come into fruition. So set a goal. Like, I want my first sweater pattern to be released on October 1st of this year. And then set goals. And like, I want the pattern to be ready on September 30th. And I want testers to be done by September 15th. And I want my pattern draft to be ready July 15th. I don't know. Whatever goals you want to do. Make sure that your goal is time bound so that you have an opportunity to be accountable and to make it happen. If you have a nebulous goal that doesn't have a start date or an end date or anything, then you might not make it happen. It's like if you never cast on a sock, it won't create itself, right? You need to actually get the process started. So making sure that your goal has a specific time frame is really important. I will use one goal as an example. For my husband this year, I wanted to make him some birthday socks, and I've made birthday socks the past year for him, and this year I had a pattern in mind that I wanted to use. SMART. It needs to be specific. I wanted to knit my husband the Fox's Day Out socks using some yarn from my stash that came from Woolberry Fiber Co. Measureable. I wanted to finish 2 ankle socks within that time frame, and I already had an idea of what modifications I wanted to make. I wanted the color work to be moved onto the foot of the sock because it was an ankle length sock. Attainable. I made sure to start the socks in July. His birthday is in August. I made that goal attainable by starting it early enough and knowing that I've already knit socks before, I've already done color work, and so I knew it was within my capability to do, even if it was stretching me by forcing me to do modifications on a pattern. That definitely was a stretch goal in a way, but I was able to do it because I gave myself enough time and I already had a lot of skills under my belt to make it happen. Realistic? Like I said, I knew I could make socks. I knew I could do color work. So it was realistic to push myself a little bit to make it happen. Time bound. The deadline was his birthday at the end of August. And so having that deadline helped me finish in time so that he could have his socks. And I was able to finish them, and they are super cute and he really enjoys them. And it was a lot of fun to create those socks for him. I encourage you to, whatever goals you want to set for yourself, make them SMART goals and write them down so that you can see all the details. Okay, that was like a big spiel, but I have just a couple other points that I think are important to consider when setting maker goals for the next year. I already mentioned the reflection on last year. What did you learn about yourself from last year's making? Did you learn that you cannot make 12 garments in a year? Then apply that to your goals. Keep that in mind as you're making your goals so that you can still make your goals attainable. In another sense, how much did you knit or crochet actually in the past year? How much can you create? I had a goal a few years ago called Attack My Stash, and I want to implement a version of this goal again for 2023. But a couple years ago, my goal was to use up all of my yarn stash. And I knew it wouldn't take me a year to do, but in starting that goal and keeping track of how many skeins I brought in and how many skeins I used up each month, I realized that it would take me a whole lot longer than I anticipated to use up my yarn stash. More than the year or two that I thought. It would take me a very long time. And I think that's partly why my goal fizzled out after a couple years. You can still read about my monthly reflections on my blog, which I'll make sure to link down below. But I couldn't reasonably knit and crochet all that yarn in the amount of time I was expecting the goal to take place in. And so keep that in mind as you're setting goals. I want to do a make 23 in 2023 video, and I cannot make 23 sweaters in a year. So I need to keep reminding myself as I'm adding things to my list and kind of refining, like, I need it to be realistic. I need to rein it in and know myself and what I can make. I'm also doing a year-end review video soon where I'll talk about all the garments I made, all the accessories I made, all the socks I made, kind of going through categories and just showing everything basically. And going through my own personal year in review is going to help me to set attainable goals for next year, since I better know now what things I make and maybe what I want to make different times of year. I started a sweater in, I think, May. Yeah, I started my no-frills sweater in May this year, and then I put it down after like 2 evenings of working on it because it's a mohair sweater and it was just too hot to touch for all of the summer. And it worked up really quickly once I picked it back up in like late September, but that wasn't realistic for me to think that I was gonna work on it in the summer. It was just too dang hot. So keep in mind when you like to work on certain projects, as well as how much you can actually create in a given time frame so that you can set goals in general that are realistic. Maybe each of your goals are really reasonable, but if you have 12 different maker goals and you also have a full-time job and a toddler at home, you're probably not gonna reach all 12 of your maker goals this year. I don't know you specifically, but understand like what is within your capacity to do and make goals that can help you do so, rather than making too many goals or too difficult of goals or unrealistic goals, unattainable goals. Just keep that in mind. And then another thing to consider when trying to figure out your goals for the year is what types of projects are you gonna make? Right now, I'm so burned out on socks. I made socks for everybody and their pet frog for Christmas this year, and even though I had some done ahead of time, December has been basically about socks for me, and I still have to knit my Desert Vista Dye Works socks for the month of December. I'm getting close on them, but even though I was so burned out on sock knitting, I still had one more pair of socks to knit. Like, why did I do that to myself? Don't be like me. You may want to knit socks all throughout the summer for summer sock camp, but maybe you want some other projects too to create some balance. Another thing to consider that's related to that is who your gifts are going to. I think part of the reason I was so burned out this December is because all my knitting was for other people, which is great, but I needed something for me too. And so if you know there's a season of your life where you're going to be focusing a lot on test making, or you're going to be focusing a lot on gifts for other people, know yourself and know if you need to balance out, maybe spread your gift making through more months of the year, or make sure you make time for something for you too. Just have that balance and keep that in mind when you're setting your goals. And then another thing I want to mention, just as far as like accessibility concerns, is the cost of things, the cost of yarn, the cost of supplies, the cost of even like acquiring patterns. I know that right now is a difficult financial time for a lot of people. And even though you may really want to knit a pair of socks on DPNs this year, maybe you don't already have DPNs and that just is not an important purchase for you to make right now. And that's based on your own personal decision. And so don't set a goal to knit a pair of socks on DPNs if you don't feel comfortable purchasing some DPNs for that project. Or for example, if you really want to knit a sweater for Christmas next year, but having a sweater quantity of yarn is a little out of the budget, then maybe set your sights on something that's a little bit more affordable or attainable for you. Or set a goal specifically for using yarn you already have, or for finding more inexpensive ways to meet those goals. So just keep that in mind, because I don't want you to set yourself up for failure with these goals. I know that none of us want to be set up for failure with these goals, and so that's something to think about as far as budgeting goes and the things that we would want to create and make throughout the year. Just keep that in mind. It's something to remember. Thank you so much for joining me as I talked a lot, my throat is all dry now, as I talked a lot about different tips and tricks for setting goals for the new year. I give you lots of ideas for what types of things you may want to make throughout the year, whether you're doing a make 9 or make 23 in 2023 or whatever you may want to do, as well as some specific goals for creating effective goals and keeping in mind the balance of the things that you make. If you have any tips and tricks for setting goals, especially in the fiber realm, but just in general, I think these principles apply, then make sure to let me know down below, because I think that this is a wonderful place to share that knowledge, as a lot of us are coming up with goals for the new year. I'm still finalizing my fiber goals for the new year, but you should see some videos coming from me soon, a year in review, talking all about the projects that I made throughout the entire year. There's a lot of them. As well as a Make 9 review video looking at all the Make 9 lists I made for this past year and how I did in accomplishing them, and maybe what I learned in planning some projects for the next year. And I definitely want to do a Make 23 in 2023 video talking about all 23 projects that I want to make throughout the year. I've learned more. I'm going to use these principles to help create my goals for the next year. So I would love to hear the kinds of fiber goals that you are going to set for the new year and what you are looking forward to accomplishing. Until next time, happy making. Bye!